I want to welcome everybody here tonight. For those of you online, welcome. This is the Everett Rail Marshfield Public Library in Marshfield, Wisconsin. Tonight we have Donna from the Wood County Master Gardeners Volunteer. She's going to be talking tonight about saving seeds. If you ever have any questions throughout the evening, just put it in that chat. I'll be monitoring those and I'll get those questions asked to Donna. You can put them in there while we're live and we'll get those answered as soon as we can. If you're having technology issues, put that in there too, so I know to maybe look to see what is going on and I can hopefully fix it. I'm representing the library. I work here at the library, so if you have any questions too about the library, you can put those in there and I can try to answer those too. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Donna. We have a live audience too. So just want to welcome everybody and thanks for joining us.
Okay. Got to switch chairs here. All right. Now, wait a minute here. How do I forward?
You put the mouse inside this picture of the screen.
Yep.
There is right there.
Oh, all right. All right. Got it.
If you do the square, it goes full screen too for you.
Okay.
There. And then.
Okay. All right. We are on. Sometimes these things, everyone works different. We're going to be talking tonight about seed saving for gardeners, and I'm going to be talking mostly about vegetables. But if you have questions about collecting flower seeds, we can talk about those too. They're sometimes a little bit easier to do than vegetable seeds because some vegetable seeds need some specific handling in order for them to be successful to save the following year. So, come on here. There we go. Can I get?
Yeah, I can.
Female gametes. So this is the way that a plant develops a seed for the next year. So fertilization is the process of the male and the female coming together, of course. Some plants are self-pollinated. Beans and peas are examples of these. They really don't need a bee or a butterfly or anything else to set seed. And what happens is inside the flower, the pollen is transferred to the stigma without ever having any insect intervene. And this kind of pollination usually results in a plant that's identical to the parent plant when you plant the seeds, because no other genes or pollen with different genes has been introduced into the flower. Cross-pollination is when the pollen from one flower goes to the stigma of another flower, and it has to be kind of the same kind of plant. Like lettuce cannot pollinate melons, but lettuce can pollinate another lettuce. So in this case, you are mixing the genes between the two plants. So the plant that results, the seeds from that plant, may not be the same as the plant you started out with. So for example, let's say you have a tomato that tastes really good, but it tends to get diseased real easy. So if you take the seeds from a tomato that is good at having disease resistant but doesn't taste so good, and you cross-pollinate them, hopefully you get one that maybe tastes better and is more disease resistant. On the other hand, you can have a really good tomato that's kind of the perfect tomato, but if it gets cross-pollinated with something that's not so good, the resulting seeds could be plants that aren't anywhere like your favorite tomato. So the thing is, when you're saving seeds, you want to make sure that you're saving the seed that is exactly like the plant you have. That's the secret. This is not a very clear slide, but some plants also have male and female flowers, and you will see this very easily on things like squash and cucumbers. The female flower has an enlargement right underneath the flower on the stem. That's the ovary where the seeds or the fruit will form. The male flower doesn't have that. So if you look out in your garden and you say, my cucumbers have all these flowers on them, but I'm not getting any cucumbers, you can look to see, is there an enlargement beneath the flower on any of those flowers? If not, they may all be male flowers. And sometimes male flowers come out early, and then the female flowers come out. And then sometimes at the end of the season, you have male flowers again, but no females. So you won't get any more cucumbers then either.
Would that be on a pumpkin?
Yeah. Yep. Same thing. Yep. And squashes. They're all in the cucurbit family. Okay. So plants not recommended necessarily for seed, because these are quite easily cross-pollinated. Our onions, cucumbers, carrots, turnip, squash. There's a list there. But we're going to talk about a couple and what to do if you want to save seeds from those, even though they're not really recommended for seed saving. Any plant that is pollinated by wind or insects is one that's not going to be very good for saving seeds unless you take some precautions, and we'll talk about that later. However, if you have only one variety of squash in your garden and the next garden that contains squash is miles away from you, you can be pretty sure that is not going to be cross-pollinated by a different kind of squash. So in that case, you could probably collect the seeds from that squash plant. However, if you have two or more varieties of squash, you need to take some measures to keep the plants from cross-pollinating. And a hybrid is a plant that is specially crossbred to produce a certain kind of plant. If you're out in the country, you may know of, usually it's college students or high school students that detassel corn. And what they're doing is taking the pollen off of one plant so that that pollen cannot be used to pollinate a different plant, so that only the pollen from a certain plant can be used to pollinate. So it's so like they would plant alternating rows, let's say, in the cornfield of plant A and plant B. You only want the pollen from plant A to go on to plant B. You want that specific cross, the males from plant A and the females from plant B. You want those two to come together for the hybrid. So you have to take off the tassel of plant B so it doesn't pollinate itself. And it you know, if you had genetics at all in high school or somewhere, you would probably understand more of this. But what I'm trying to say is you have to be careful about how the seeds are produced if you're going to save them. I had something like this happen. I had different kinds of cucurbits one year in a small garden, and at the end of the year, I just threw all the seeds, you know, and things in a pile. And the next year, I had the strangest looking plants growing out of my compost pile. It might be something like a cucumber, but it had stripes like a zucchini because the plants had cross-pollinated. And so that's what will happen if you don't take care not to keep the plants from cross-pollinating. It's kind of tricky to understand, but if you say, well, I'm not going to take seeds from a hybrid, you'll be okay. This is what a hybrid is. We talked about this. You have plant A and plant B, and they're crossed to get this hybrid, which is the seed that's super good, okay? And if you cross-pollinate that hybrid with another hybrid of the same kind, you're going to revert back to these other different kinds here. It's just what happens in genetics. Okay. What are good for seed saving? Heirloom plants. And an heirloom is a plant that has been growing or a plant line for at least 50 years. And it's basically a pure line. If you plant an heirloom tomato from seeds from an heirloom tomato, it's going to be an heirloom tomato. They have very little genetic variation, provided you don't plant a different kind of tomato next to your heirloom tomato. Open pollinated plants are pure lines of a variety. They're growing in a large field. Let's say you're growing beans, and every once in a while, one of those might be crossed with something. But basically, the whole field is the same. It's open pollinated. There's not much variation at all. And what they would do, let's say they're green beans, and you find out, okay, there's a yellow bean growing over there. They pull that one out. Or maybe it's a Roma kind of bean, and they pull that one out. And then they know that the rest of the seeds will be okay because they'll come true to what the beans were originally. Self-pollinated plants are also pretty safe to collect seeds from without being especially careful about doing something. And seed saving from plants that readily self-sow. So if you have flowers in your garden that, you know, they just come up by themselves every year, those are good for saving because that plant has developed a pure line, and it's, you know, the seeds are always going to be the same. This is very often done with flowers. Like if you were talking about your marigolds. If you were to just leave that marigold plant and let it drop its seeds, it would probably produce the same kind of marigolds, you know, the next year. I'm thinking somebody, Cleome, it's a flower. What's the other name for it? Anyway, it's got a really open thing. And that's a plant like that where, it, you know, if you don't collect the seeds, or if you don't cut off the seed head, you'll have lots of them the next year. So that's another good one for saving. You can save the seeds and plant it where you want them the next year. Okay, now we said, what if you have plants that are not open pollinated? They're not heirlooms. They're maybe wind pollinated or insect pollinated. One of the things you can do is to bag the flowers as the buds form. And in that case, then you have to take the pollen from one flower within that bag and actually transfer it to another flower in that bag. It sounds kind of like a lot of work, but think of all the seeds you get out of a tomato. So you really don't have to do it to too many flowers. Or let's say a squash. You really would have to do it probably to only one flower, and you would have a lot of seeds. Okay. So that's one thing you can do to keep plants from cross-pollinating. Another thing is to separate different varieties by a big enough distance that they're not likely to cross, that insects aren't flying that far from one plant to another. Bees tend to pollinate when they find a good spot to pollinate. They keep coming back to that spot. They don't wander off and go to a different one because that's too much work. You have to fly to find a new spot. So they keep coming back. So a plant close to another plant that way, even if it's cross-pollinated, will likely be pollinated by the same kind. Or one of the things you can do is only grow one variety. Let's say you have one variety of squash. That's the only thing you grow. Then you're pretty sure that the seeds from that squash will be like the ones that you planted. Okay, because all of the plants around that plant are the same. Kind of technical, but I just wanted people to understand a little bit about cross-pollinating and how if you save seeds, you might not get the same plant the following year. Okay, beans and peas are some of the easiest ones to save. If you're going to save seeds from these, you want to leave the beans or the peas on the plant until they're all dried. They're brown, and sometimes they'll even start to crack open a little bit. The seeds inside will be, sometimes they'll be loose and make a rattling sound. And in order to save these, it's really pretty easy. You just break open the pod, take the seeds out, lay them out so they can dry really thoroughly for a couple of weeks. Most of them will shrivel up a little bit, especially pea seeds. And then you just store them in a closed container, and they're good for like 3 years or more. So those are some of the really easy ones. Lettuce seeds, most of it is self-pollinating, but what you need to do to save lettuce seeds is just leave a plant or two to bolt. In other words, it grows real tall and it gets a flower stalk on it. When the flower stalk turns to a fluffy head, much like a dandelion, cut off the top of that stalk, put it in a paper bag upside down. So you open the paper bag, you put the stalk in upside down, and you tie the bag together at the top. And the seeds will dry and fall into the bag then, and then you can collect them. And again, you can store those in a paper envelope or a jar, just like all the different kinds of seeds, however you prefer to do it. Come on here. There we go. Cucurbits. Now we're talking about squashes, pumpkins, cucumbers, melons. So actually there are 3 different species of cucurbits. If you plant banana, Crucia, Hubbard, and buttercup squashes, and those are the only kind you plant, you could cross-pollinate between those. You can't cross-pollinate a buttercup with an acorn. It doesn't work. And you can't cross a butternut with any of the others. So if you want to not have to worry about cross-pollination, you could plant one from each of these 3 species, and you still wouldn't have to worry about cross-pollinating because they won't cross-pollinate with each other. Okay. So you need to decide which kinds of cucurbits you're growing next to each other, whether or not you have to bag that flower in order to get it to grow true. Cucurbits, generally you need to bag the flowers in order to keep them from cross-pollinating, or separate by at least a half mile. Most of us don't have a half mile on our property to separate our plants. And then you allow the cucumbers to grow until they're yellow and really hard, but don't let them begin to get soft and ferment. So it sometimes takes a little practice to figure out at what point are they really mature and they're not still going to, start fermenting. Winter squash should be fully ripe. And you can tell if a winter squash is ripe is if you press it with your thumbnail and it doesn't leave a dent. I mean, you can't just jab it in there, but generally, medium pressure on the skin. If it doesn't leave a dent, that usually indicates that the squash is ripe. And usually they turn a specific color. So you have to know what kind of squash you're growing. For both of these, you remove the seeds, separate anything from the flesh and wash it. You might put it in a sieve and run water through it and just, work the goo out of it. And then lay it on newspaper or a screen and let it dry for several weeks. And so that's also a pretty easy one to do. Now we're going to get into some of them that aren't so easy to do. Zucchinis. You allow the fruit to grow to that baseball bat size, okay? And it becomes hard and woody. When it's in that stage, you open it, scoop out the center with the seeds in it, and throw the rest away. Put it in a jar with a little water and mix it to kind of separate the seeds a little bit, and let it stand for 1 to 2 days. You want it to kind of ferment a little bit. Stir it every once in a while to keep it from getting moldy. It's going to smell sour. And the seeds, however, should be separating from the flesh. So they should look clean. At that point, you can add a little more water to the jar and keep swishing it around till the seeds are separated. Pour off the extra water and the floating seeds. A floating seed is a seed that is not going to germinate. It didn't develop right. And just keep repeating that until the seeds are clean. And then again, you spread those on a screen or whatever and wait for them to get dry. So pepper seeds are really pretty easy. Peppers are self-pollinating, but sometimes insects do visit the flowers and cross-pollinate. So you should bag it or separate varieties by at least 500 feet. If you're growing a combination of hot and sweet peppers, hot peppers will dominate. So you may have a seed that was crossed with a hot pepper. It'll grow what looks like a nice bell pepper, but when you eat it, it's going to be hot. Okay, the hot gene dominates in the pepper. So bag the buds here until the tiny peppers begin to form. By the way, anytime you're bagging the flower, you don't have to leave that bag on forever. You just bag it until the flower dries up and you see a little fruit starting. Then you can take the bag off. It's been pollinated. It's not going to get pollinated anymore because the flower is gone. So you don't have to leave that bag on forever. You want to allow the pepper to mature fully, and that's way beyond the point at which you would eat the pepper. You leave the pepper on until it starts to get soft and mushy and kind of wrinkly. And that's when the seeds are actually ripe. If you take a green pepper, except for varieties that never turn color, but there aren't too many of those. If you take the seeds out of a green pepper, the seeds aren't mature yet. They won't grow. So you have to wait for the pepper to turn color, whatever color it does when it's mature, and then wait for it to get to that wrinkly, soft stage. Separate the seeds from that core that they're usually hanging on and dry thoroughly. This one, you should dry it on a hard surface, because if you dry it on a paper towel or like newspaper, the seeds might sprout before they dry. So you want to put them on something like a china plate or a screen. And then the last one we're going to talk about is tomato seeds. And these are probably, well, they're kind of like the zucchini seeds in that you have to ferment them a little bit. Tomato seed or tomato plants are usually self pollinated, but we also see bees all the time on tomato blossoms. So there's a good chance that they can be cross-pollinated too. You want to use fully ripe, undamaged tomatoes. So no diseases on them, no rotting spots or anything like that. You're going to cut open the tomato and scoop out the seeds and that jelly kind of stuff between the sections. Put that in a jar with a little bit of water and cover it and allow it to ferment for 3 days. And it's going to be kind of stinky when you're done. And then just like zucchini, you add about 3 times as much water and agitate so you can get the seeds loose from that gel. And let the seeds settle to the bottom and keep pouring off the gooey stuff. The gel inside the tomato actually keeps the seeds from sprouting. So if you don't get that gel off, if you were to just dry the seeds, they probably wouldn't sprout the next year. And then here you can see this example where the seeds are kind of coming to the bottom and the formerly gooey gel stuff is up on top. Any floating seeds, again, are not viable. And keep adding water and repeating the agitating and pouring off. When most of the gel is gone, you can put it in a sieve and you can keep, running water over that and, working the goo off of it. And then wash the seeds and put them on newspaper or paper towel and let them dry, just like many of the other ones. All seeds can be stored in a paper envelope or a tightly closed jar. But the thing is, you want it to be in a cool, dark, dry place. So if they're in a paper envelope, I sometimes still put them in a jar, and then you can close that up and keep the moisture out. You don't want to store them like in your garage or an outdoor shed, that kind of thing, because that will be too warm. So if you have a cool place like a basement, that's a good place to store seeds as long as they're protected from extra moisture that you might have in your basement. So in that case, you would want to put them inside a closed container of some kind. Let's see. Flower seeds. Flowers that readily self-sow, those are good choices. Also, native plants. Most native plants do not cross-pollinate. It's like an open pollinated plant. They just make their own seeds. After about 2 or 3 weeks and the flower has faded, oftentimes the petals will fall off and you'll have a little knob of something left usually. Start watching for seed formations. Usually the stigma or the ovary containing the seeds, it starts growing. It'll get bigger after the petals fall off. And when the stigma and ovary are brown and dry, that's when the seeds are usually ripe. Some flowers have very unique ways of spreading themselves. There are some flowers that actually, when the seed is ripe, the seed pod like flips open and just spews the seeds out. And if you have that kind of a plant, it's kind of tricky sometimes to catch the seed when it's ripe and before the plant has opened it up and, dispersed it. So that's where one of these mesh bags can come in again too. When it looks like it's getting kind of ripe, you tie a little mesh bag around it. So when it opens up and flings the seeds, you catch the seeds.
What would be an example of a plant that would do that?
You have, when I say wood sorrel, it's a little plant that looks like a 3-leaf clover, but it gets yellow flowers. It's a weed in the lawn usually. Mm-hmm. That's one of the plants that do that. Violets do that also. They fling them open. I've got a plant it's called Touch Me Not. It's a jewel weed is another name for it. That kind of plant will do that. Impatiens will do that. It's really kind of tricky to catch impatient seeds. So yeah, there are certain ones that's their method of dispersing. Other ones, they want insects to come and get them and take them somewhere, or they attract birds or something that eat them and disperse them. If you don't know what the seed looks like on a particular plant, go online and see if you can find pictures of the seeds, because sometimes they are really weird looking, and sometimes what you think is the seed is not really the seed. So, and sometimes they're really like as fine as dust almost.
Is that great blue lobelia? Are you familiar with
Mhm.
that? Is that really fine?
That's really fine.
And I know what I'm getting. Okay.
Cardinal flower is another one that's really fine like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But usually that one, it's kind of stays in that little capsule, and you can actually catch it before it goes away. Oftentimes with flowers, you have to separate the seeds from some chaff or fluffy stuff, like milkweed seeds, take the little fluffy things off. And then you can store those also in envelopes like you would store other seeds. The thing with a lot of native plants are they need a cold period in order to sprout. So you can do something, you can either plant them where you want them the next year, in your garden, and just mark the spots, where it is, that you don't work it up the following year. And I don't know, have you heard of winter sowing?
Yeah.
Okay, that's another thing where you take a milk jug, for those of people in the audience, and you cut around it horizontally about maybe 3 inches from the bottom, leave a little bit of a hinge where the handle is, and you put potting soil in there or seed starting soil, and you wet it down really well. You put your seeds in there, and then you tape the jug shut, and you take the cap off, and you set it outside.
What time of year do you do that in
It-
our area?
It depends on how many days the seed takes to germinate. Some take like 120 or 90 days. Others take like as little as 10 days or 30 days. I usually start mine right after Christmas. When you're all done with Christmas and you got some time again. January is a good time. And you just set it out in the snowbank, not underneath the eaves. Got to be out. Yeah.
Because I'm trying to think, okay, now I'm saving containers because I've never done it. Okay, but we have to have the soil that can't be froze outside.
No, you would use like potting soil.
You have to have that. We have the room, but we're going to have to bring that into the garage.
Yeah.
So that
it's not frozen.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, so that my mind is getting everything organized or ready for doing that.
Yeah.
Because you can't I was too late last year.
Yeah.
And so now I'm going to try.
Okay.
But I'll do natives.
Yeah. Natives work quite well for that.
Okay. But what are the best? Because some natives need several years to even germinate.
That's true. Some are what they call double dormant, which means it takes 2 years. I believe it's the one that comes up with the bells hanging on the bottom. I can't think of the name right now. And I think Jack in the Pulpit might be 2 years too. But
what would you think would be the easiest to start with?
Like coneflowers.
Okay.
Coneflowers, and if you have the blue lobelia,
Yep.
the cardinal flower, beard tongue or penstemon.
Yep.
That one is very easy.
Yeah.
Is very, very easy.
Mhm.
A lot of the grasses, if you want like ornamental grasses, they work quite well. Some of the tougher ones are the spring ephemerals, like trilliums and hepatica, all those ones that you would see real early and then they just disappear by June or July. Those are some of the tougher ones. The easier ones are a lot of what you would call your prairie flowers because they're tough. Rudbeckia is another one.
I want to start eating.
Yeah. There's 2 nursery sites that near us that sell plants, and one of them sells seeds too. It's Prairie Nursery is in Westfield, and Prairie Moon Nursery is in Winona.
Yeah.
And both of them put out very good information on the internet about propagating wild plants. So if you have some questions about that, that's a very good resource to go to. Yep. Okay. Any other questions?
What about the blue false indigo? I finally realized where the seed pod is. I didn't even know I had it.
Yeah.
And so when that seed pod is dark,
Yeah. Right.
would that be a winter sow?
Yep. You
Or is
could
that
winter.
more fussy
No, that's an easy one to sow.
there.
Blue false indigo.
Great.
Yeah. It kind of looks like a pea pod.
It is.
Yeah, because it is a legume. It's in the same family. Lupins are also pretty easy to do too. Trying to think what else I have in my garden. But yeah, and especially the Prairie Moon Nursery site, because they also sell seeds. They have a lot of information about germinating seeds and different ways to do it.
Yeah, they letter them in their
Mhm.
catalog.
Yeah, according to the way you have
Turn
to
the
treat them.
page Because I don't want to deal with them.
Well, there's always trial and error.
Yeah.
You just try it one year, and if it doesn't work,
Nothing to lose.
you have nothing to lose, right? So, and the seeds probably would keep an extra year. If you don't sow them all one year, you can try it again the next year. Yeah, some of them have to have like a warm summertime period and then a cold period before they'll sprout. Some of them have to have a cold and then a warm and then another cold before they'll sprout. So, it can get kind of complicated, but it's kind of fun to see if you can grow them. Our local Master Gardener group, because of the jumping worms,
Yes.
we have not been digging plants to share for our plant sales. So we've gone to doing the winter sowing and also using a lot of native plants too. So that will be at the Maple Fall Fest in the fall. So if you want to come down there and check out the plants we grew
Okay, and that's all.
by winter sowing method.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a kind of a fun thing to do.
Mhm.
So kind of in summary, understand plant pollination to help you determine which plants can be used to save seeds. Plan ahead how you're going to isolate plants, either by planting them far enough apart or by using mesh bags to prevent cross-pollination if you want to save seeds from a plant that will be likely to be cross-pollinated. Know when you need to harvest the fruit in order to ensure that the seeds are ripe inside. Know what needs to be done to extract and prepare the seeds so that they will germinate the following year. Like we say, some of them we talked about have to actually be kind of fermented in order for the seeds to germinate the following year. And then always remember to store seeds in a cool, dark, dry area. And if you don't have all 3 of those, then think of, okay, if I have a cool and a dark area, how can I keep them dry? So, like by putting them in jars or whatever and with a tight fitting cover. So, and most seeds, with the exception vegetable seeds of onions and corn, most seeds will keep 2, 3, sometimes up as long as 5 or more years. So corn, doesn't keep as long, and onion seeds. But otherwise, just because you don't use them all one year, you can keep them for the next year. I always end my programs too with a little bit of information about how to get reliable information and researched information. And if you want to do that, you can add 2 terms to your query on the web. And the examples of here are how to save seeds. That's what you want to know. And then you put the word extension after it, or how to save seeds, site:/.edu. And if you do that, this will bring up information from like universities where they've researched stuff, and that what they are telling you has worked over and over and over again. It's not just somebody who's got a blog that says, this really worked good for me this year, and you have no idea, where they live, what they do, how to, it's just a fluke that happened to them for 1 year. Other sites that tend to be more reliable end in .org, like you might have orchids, some kind of orchid society.org. And you know that is a group that's dedicated to, growing orchids. That's their thing. Seedsavers.org. That's another good source, by the way, for saving seeds, with lots of information on how to save and, that sort of thing. Anything that ends with a .com, I would just bypass for the most part. It's, you don't know what you're getting when you're looking at something like that. So that's about all I have, unless you have more questions or we have anything from the audience. Nobody out there has any questions? I hope we didn't confuse you too much on all that pollinating stuff, but it's you kind of sometimes have to decide, well, is it worth saving the seed from this, or is it likely that I won't get the same plant again? So. Anything else? I think we're a little shorter tonight than some of the programs, but.
Does anybody have any
Yes.
subjects they want to learn more about?
Yeah.
We're always looking for new ideas.
You can let them know at the library. The Wood County Master Gardeners has a website also where you can leave a message or ask a question or something. So if you think of something, you can leave your comment there. Just say, I would like to have a Garden Guru program on whatever. And I think next month we're going to talk a little bit about some common diseases and things that you're going to find in your yard. It's probably going to be too late, but maybe it'll help for next year, because a lot of times preventing that goes way back to when you plant it, and how you plant it and how you take care of it. So, if it happened this year, maybe we can do something to prevent it next year.
Well, lots of times the diseases stay in the ground, so you don't want to plant in the same spot.
Yes. Yes. And we can talk about that too, because when you clean up this year, you want to be sure that you're not going to be keeping it around for next year.
Yeah.
Do you need to sign off here?
No, I just came. If we want to be done, you can click right there.
All right.